Welcome back to another tabletop review. Today we'll look at the Bryco Arms Model 25. The Bryco 25 is an example of the inexpensive small caliber handguns that were made by the thousands by a number of small U.S. gun manufacturers, all related one way or another to the George Jennings family in the Southern California area during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The quality wasn't that great, earned them the nickname of junk guns. Because they were plentiful and cheap, they also became popular with the criminal element and earned an additional nickname of Saturday Night Special. That being said, the Bryco 25 is still an interesting part of American gun history. Let's make sure that this one is cleared first. By the way, if you enjoy this review, be sure to share, like, and subscribe. Several months back, I reviewed another junk gun, the Sterling 300, a 25 caliber pistol manufactured in Upper State, New York. During that video, I talked about the Saturday Night Special or junk guns, and I covered a little of their history. I even showed a Jennings J22 as an example of one of the worst junk guns ever produced. One of the points I made about these guns was that they basically have no value, so typically you could find used ones that were even in like new condition for under $100, actually closer to $50. By the way, I have a friend who's a retired gunsmith who says he saw a lot of these junk guns, including the Brycos, come in for repair. They'd come in with a firing pin or some other problem, and during inspection he'd find slide stress fractures or other unrepairable issues. His comment was, "Don't waste your money." But something really strange has been going on in this past year. I've been following auctions, and I've noticed that these junk guns continue to sell for higher and higher amounts, like closer to $150, even $200 today, and I don't know why, but it's caused me to take another look at these guns. So let's back up and talk a little bit about California, the Southwest Ring of Fire guns. Guns that basically were produced by the same family members or their associates, the Jennings family. The Jennings family companies, or Ring of Fire companies, referring to their dubious nature of these companies, included Raven Arms, Davis, Phoenix, Bryco, Jennings, AMT, Lorson, Talon, Sundance, Standard, Cobra Arms. I may have missed one or two in that list, but the point is that there were a lot of these cheap guns being produced by a bunch of companies with connections to each other, and that's why most of these guns look so similar to each other. But they're all related to the Raven Arms P25 pistol, which began production in 1970 by George Jennings. These Jennings family guns were so bad that the companies would go bankrupt due to litigations resulting from their poor quality. And it got worse because as one of these companies would go bankrupt and shut down, you see a new company start up under another name, but run by a family member or associate of the same family. Now, let me be clear that as bad as this history is, I believe that these guns are still an important part of American gun history, which is why I've collected a few samples. And while the connections of these companies may be fascinating, it's also somewhat confusing. Bryco, for example, was started in 1985 when George Jennings' son Bruce was faced with the prospects of losing his federal firearms license for a felony assault charge. Bruce sold Jennings firearms to Cal Wesco, owned by his former office manager, Gene Johnson. After a plea bargaining the charge down to a misdemeanor, Bruce Jennings converted Jennings Firearms into a firearms wholesaler and established a new company, Bryco Arms, controlled by his ex-wife, Janice, to manufacture firearms. Now, Jennings Firearms, the wholesaler, bought guns from both Cal Wesco and Bryco Arms and resold them to distributors. In 1991, the Cal Wesco closed due to litigation problems, and Jennings was started up after Bryco was sued out of business, and so it went. Unfortunately, what may be expected was that they would continue to produce the same guns with a new name printed on them, but typically without improvements or corrections of defects or malfunctions. That's why they all look about the same and share the same problems, and it's what earned these related companies the nickname Ring of Fire, and their products being dubbed junk guns. So after doing a little research, I decided I'd look for one of the 25 caliber guns at the right price and for one of the later companies like Bryco, Jennings, or Lorson, because I heard that they appeared to have fewer problems. As I understood, the Bryco 25 was less common, which increased its appeal to me. Still paying more than I think it was worth, this Bryco Arms 25 was a result of that search. As for the Bryco Arms Company and this Bryco Arms 25, as I mentioned earlier, many of these Jennings family companies went out of business due to legal problems as a result of malfunctions due to their poor quality. But they were all related to the Ravens Arms P25 pistol, which began production in 1970 by George Jennings. Legal problems forced the Jennings families to start their business over again, and the Davis Arms and Jennings Arms were the results. As I said earlier, when more legal problems developed together with the Jennings family, or factory burning down in 1991, a new company resulted, and that was the beginning of Bryco Arms, named after George's grandson, Brian. Basically, the same gun, with a new company name, Bryco. Bryco also made other caliber pistols, including a 9mm. However, legal problems caused the end of Bryco, and a new company, Jennings Arms, was the result. Now, there are several good, more in-depth videos on the history of these guns on the internet if you're interested. Suffice to say that the Jennings family made a lot of these guns, and so there are a lot of these out there under the various company names I've mentioned. They are not highly reliable, but they were cheap, conventional in design, and easy to operate. It seemed like everyone had one of these low-budget autos back in the day. My cop friends tell me that these guns were often used in crimes because they were so plentiful, easy to come by, cheap and easy to dispose of. They were made in 22, 25, 32, 380, and even some later versions in 9mm. Back in the 80s and 90s, these guns, especially the 22s, were everywhere. And many ended up in pawn shops because of their poor quality. Many quickly became inoperable and were just discarded by their owners. I remember a guy cursing and out of frustration throwing a Jennings 22 into a trash can at a range a few years ago. So as you can imagine, as I said, when I made the video on the Sterling 300, these are not highly valued guns. But if you inherited one of these and it's all you got, well, then it's all you got. As for packaging, these guns were typically packaged in a simple cardboard box with a manual and included only one magazine. My experience with buying used guns is that if they don't have their original packing, they probably weren't as well cared for. But the packing on these guns was fairly flimsy to begin with, and after 30 years, it's not uncommon for the packaging to be long gone. As for specifications, the Bryco 25 CA is a 25 caliber single-action semi-automatic pistol. I believe the CA stands for California, but if you know more about this, please let me know. The more common Bryco productions were the Bryco Arms Model 38 semi-automatic pistol, available in both 32 ACP and 380 ACP calibers. I also see a lot of Bryco 9mm out there today. The gun is all metal with investment casted steel alloy metal slide and frame. The barrel is 2.5 inches in length. Sights are fixed built into the top of the slide. Slide serrations are on the rear of the slide are very well defined. Safety is here. And the Bryco 25 has a loaded chamber indicator. It's a little overkill. It's this fairly large unit that it juts out the back of the gun when there's a round in the chamber. I used a dummy round to get that to come out. Overall height is 3.4 inches. Overall length is 5 inches. Width is 0.9 inches at the grip. The grips are black plastic. Weight with the empty magazine is 14.2 ounces. Magazine capacity is 6, and the magazine release is the European on the heel of the gun grip. The trigger travel is short, but the pull seems heavy, perhaps 11 pounds. As for range experience, first of all, this is not a target gun. At best, it could be called a self-defense gun. But keep in mind their history of unreliability. Now, I'm always more cautious about firing used guns, and most of my guns were bought used. So I can say that it's important to clean and check things out first. As I said, it was an auction gun, and most used guns I buy seem somewhat dirty and dry. This gun was no different. A lot of dried oil residue. It actually cleaned up well for a 30-year-old gun, and I would say that from the looks of it, this gun hasn't seen much use. It may never have actually been fired. Everything seems to function as it should, and the gun seems tight. The barrel is shiny, rifling is clear, no wear on the slide or other parts, no wear or scratches on the magazine. Interesting, I hadn't expected that. Loading the magazine was easy, with rounds sitting properly in the magazine seated tightly when inserted. Racking the slide was light and fairly smooth, with the first round loading in as it should. Promising. The safety was sure, without stiffness or play. That red loaded chamber indicator is really hard to miss. The gun actually is empty right now, as you can see. Firing Blazer 50 grain full metal jacket rounds, which is all I had available, this gun ran smoothly through 2 magazines. The Blazer rounds are not the greatest. I've had a number of 25 caliber pistols that have had failures to cycle. That's been a common problem with these Blazer rounds. I would have preferred Fiocchi 35 grain XTP ammo, but the Blazers were all the ammo for the range that I had. So I was somewhat surprised at how well the Bryco functioned. The Bryco felt good in my hand, was comfortable to fire, had little recoil, and was more accurate than expected. Even the sights worked better than I anticipated. The heavy double action trigger was not great, but probably it's safer to carry. I was encouraged. I ran another 2 full magazines through the Bryco. Again, flawless performance. The gun's action was tight and smooth throughout. Overall, I was a bit stunned. I really hadn't expected a very positive range experience, and I really didn't expect that I would end up kind of liking this little gun. I'm even beginning to appreciate how it looks, even with this rather obnoxious loaded chamber indicator. Well, the first con, and probably the Bryco Arms 25's biggest problem, is its pedigree and association with the Jennings family's companies. This one seems okay now, but there's no denying a reputation for failure. And as I said many times before, like anything man-made, you can have good ones and bad ones. Hopefully the bad ones are few and far between. Too many bad ones and your reputation suffers. So while this one may be a good one, there have been too many bad ones for a good rating compared to today's firearm standards. That's just the way it is. Also, as these guns age, springs may need replacing and internal parts were not robustly made. Bryco Arms has been out of business for going on 20 years, so parts are becoming expensive and getting harder to find. Be prepared for that challenge. My recommendation, if you had one of these guns, is don't overwork it. Failure is inevitable, and maybe sooner than you expect. For pocket carry, the Bryco 25 is heavy at 14 ounces compared to, let's say, a Ruger LCP 380 at only 9.6 ounces, for example, and it's 2 ounces heavier than the slightly larger Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 380. Finally, my opinion is that the 25 caliber round is really inadequate as a defensive caliber. If you're going to carry for defense, be aware that although it might be more reliable than a rimfire 22, ballistically it's not much of an improvement. Some would argue that it's no improvement, and it's certainly more expensive. If you tend to carry this 25 caliber though, at least use Hornady critical defense rounds. Well, the biggest advantage of the Bryco 25 is its size for concealment. It's the same size as a Ruger LCP 380, which I just happen to have one here. Therefore, it lends itself fairly well to pocket carry. It's an all-metal gun, which in theory could contribute to its longevity, but I wouldn't count on it. At about 4 ounces more than the Ruger LCP and being only a 25 caliber gun, it's much more comfortable to shoot. Although prices seem to be rising for used Brycos, they're still cheap. Because these guns were so cheap originally, many were bought by people who knew nothing about guns but thought they should have a gun. Many have never been fired. That could be a good thing. And some of these can be found in the-box condition at pawn shops and auctions. Before the recent rush on buying guns, you could pick these up for between $50 and $75 easily. For a lot of people, that might have been all they could afford for a self-defense firearm. As I already said, I'm not a fan of the 25 ACP for self-defense, but it's better than nothing, and so is a 22 for that matter. One more pro is that because these guns seem to have increased in value, today might be a good day to sell or trade the one you have so that you can get a better gun. Breakdown and disassembly of this gun is fairly easy. First thing we're going to do is remove the magazine. check once again that it's empty. And then this is the unit back here. I'm going to use a dowel here to push that in just a little bit. And when I push that in, I can lift up on the back of the slide. You can see it just popped up there. And then I'm going to have to hold my finger over that little area there because it's spring-loaded. And if you don't keep it from springing out, it'll be flying out across the room. So with that up, I can just bring it back a little bit. And there, now I can remove the spring and the firing pin. There we go. And there, that's it pretty much. Reassembly is basically just the opposite. I return this recoil spring, and I'm going to have to return the firing pin spring, and this little retaining unit has to go in to the slot there, and I have to hold that in. I'm now going to return the slide to the frame, and when I bring this back, in order to get that to actually work, I've got to push again on that little unit to get it so it slips down into the frame. And that's it. As for cost, of course, Bryco Arms is no longer in business, so there's no manufacturer suggested retail for this gun. And while there are examples of Jennings family firearms that you can find that have really or never been fired like this one, these used guns don't have still much of an appeal. Even the best examples might only fetch around $175 today. I'll admit I'm surprised that these guns in good shape are fetching between $125 and $175 in auction today. But a price of $50 to $100 would probably be a better price in my opinion. Now before we end today's video, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't already, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe down below. And thanks for watching. Okay, while this Bryco Arms 25 functioned better than my Sterling 300, which was horrible, the Bryco 25 is still not a high quality made firearm, and the 25 caliber round is questionable as a defensive round. Still, I've got to say that the construction of this one is far superior to the Jennings J22, which I'm actually a little afraid to fire, or even the Sterling 325 for that matter. And because the Bryco Arms 25 is uncommon, I'm glad I was able to acquire this one for my collection. Perhaps I was just lucky to get one of the better ones here, or perhaps Bryco guns might be a little better than the similar guns maybe the other Jennings related companies, maybe not. So I'm probably going to say the same thing about the Bryco 25 as I did about the Sterling 25. And that's why I'm not sure I could honestly make a recommendation of Bryco Arms 25 as a defensive firearm. And it's not just a question of the 25 caliber. It's the question of the reliability based on the overall history of guns from the Ring of Fire companies like Bryco Arms. You just can't expect these guns to last. But if it's the gun you have, it is what it is. Hopefully, it's one of the better ones, or at least it's still somewhat fresh. Now for me, these type of guns are merely a collecting novelty. If that's your interest as well, then from my experience with this one, I'd say the Bryco 25 could be a good one. But if you're looking for an actual personal defensive weapon, my recommendation is that you'd be much better off saving a few more bucks and investing in a more reliable and effective firearm than any of these Ring of Fire company products. And with this current bizarre increasing cost of these junk guns, I'd say that's even more true today. Comparing the Bryco 25 to more reputable and higher caliber guns of about the same size, like the Ruger LCP 380 or even the slightly larger Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 380, it's a no-brainer. In the long run, you'll be happier and safer with the Ruger or the Smith & Wesson. Now that being said, any weapon you carry is better than the one you left at home. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll be back for my next tabletop review. Until next time, stay safe.